Hey everybody, it's Jay Baer, customer experience author, speaker, expert, advisor, and I am back with my friends from Stream Realty talking about the power of customer experience in the commercial office world. I'm joined again by Adam Showalter. We spoke, I don't know, like 6, 8 months ago or something like that, Adam, and we're back with an update on what you're doing with X2. Joined also this time by Preston Young from Stream Realty. Gents, I think it'd be great maybe if Preston, you could give us a little level set on kind of what Stream Realty does in case folks aren't fully aware.
Yeah, you bet. So we're in the commercial real estate industry, like you said, and really focus on three products: office, industrial, and data centers. And within those products, we are a full service provider. So we'll do leasing, tenant representation, property management, development management, construction management, you name it. And in the 15 locations where we are across the country. But then on top of that, we also have an investment platform that invests in acquisitions as well as developments on an opportunistic basis.
Preston, you're the national head for investor services at Stream, and as Adam and I talked about before, you're testing a new hospitality-driven approach to property management. It's certainly a differentiator for Stream, and the fact that you also own properties is also something a little different than most folks in the category. You call this differentiator X2, extraordinary and incredibly profound workplace experiences. Why? What inspired you to even go down this path to begin with?
Yeah, I think that, we've seen the office world just continue to evolve, over the past 20, 30 years. And, you look at where maybe 20 years ago, if an office building had a fitness center or a conference center, that was a very special thing. And then every office building then had a fitness center and a conference center. And that arms race has just only continued. And it's really kind of continued to a point where, pretty much tapped out on what the physical attributes needed to be to a building. And so what is that differentiator that we've seen? Well, we've seen trends towards hospitality from an architectural standpoint, from a sensory standpoint, particularly in the lobbies. And then the experience standpoint was really kind of the last thing that office owners really wanted or needed in order to really provide something different and unique in order to differentiate themselves from the competition. And so that experience has been something that's been done very successfully by a handful of very smaller organizations that control few product within their various market set and have done really well. And so what we wanted to do was take some of the great ideas that they have brought to the table and really scale it to our portfolio and the assets that are deserving of it.
I love it. Adam, you're the managing director for National Office Investor Services. It's so good to see you again. And you are, I think, ostensibly the head of the X2 program. Can you talk a little bit about, at its core, what differentiates X2 from sort of a traditional property management approach that we're probably all familiar with?
Yeah. Well, glad to be back here, Jay. Good to see you. And I think it's been 7.5 months, so your guess was right, since we last spoke. And a lot has changed in those 7.5 months.
No kidding.
Which maybe we'll talk about, maybe we won't. But listen, as Preston alluded to, we have watched the office industry change significantly over the last 20, 30 years, and pretty extraordinarily over the last 3 years since COVID had happened. And so the opportunity that we saw was to really elevate the experience of the workplace. And when I think about what our mission and vision is of X2, it's to really change the way that people experience the office. And when we say people, that's anyone and everyone that steps foot into that building, from the property manager that runs that building, to the engineers that help on the operations side, to the tenants that come in and out of that building, the tenants' guests that come in and out of that building, also including our security teams and our janitorial teams and everyone else. And as Preston had mentioned earlier, that evolution was somewhat happening over the last couple of decades, but only accelerated in the last 3 years to really create the opportunity, based on what we were seeing from a customer demand standpoint, to really elevate the experiences at a much more granular, scalable level that we set out to do about 7.5 months ago.
It's interesting, Preston. Do you think, and again, you both nodded to the fact that this idea of being more experience-led differentiators has sort of been around in the industry for a bit, certainly not to the degree that you're pursuing it, but do you think that X2 or something like this would have happened without a pandemic, or do you feel like it was sort of the ignition switch for this kind of decision?
Yeah, I think it eventually would have happened, but as Adam alluded to, basically all the trends that were underway prior to the pandemic just hit like a hyperspace button during COVID. And office buildings had an identity crisis, and a lot of them had to ask, what are we really here for? What purpose are we serving? And at the end of the day, it's to provide kind of the optimal work environment for the tenants and the communities in which they serve. And so when you kind of look at it in that light, providing a curated high level of service per particular tier or subset within the office world made complete sense. And so I think a lot more people since that point have had greater conviction in putting it forward.
Yeah. One of the things that you say at Stream I think is really interesting is that value creation starts with the customer, which I assume is sort of the business case for X2 in many ways. What does that mean to you inside the organization, Preston?
Oh, I just think it just starts and stops with, with the tenant, with the customer. They're the ones that are the lifeblood of the building. And sometimes owners can kind of lose sight of that and focus on other things. And generally when they do, it doesn't end well for them. And so if you just can provide a great work environment, you're responsive, you're proactive, the little things that are done each and every day, if those are met and if they're met with a high degree, you're going to do well.
And Jay, I think to add on to that, what we observed in building X2 was really that the commercial office space had become very transactional from a customer to vendor,
Sure.
office owner, provider, and that it was focused and centered around the financial wherewithal of said customer, around how much space they needed, how much it was going to cost to build out their space. And I think to no fault of anyone in particular, it just became very transactional from a customer relationship standpoint. And the trend that we saw starting, and as Preston said, accelerating after COVID, was the opportunity to maybe reset that customer relationship, and hence the customer at the center of that value creation strategy, to really focus back on the customer, much like other industries have, from hotels to food and beverage to hospitality.
Adam, I know it's come a long way since the first time we talked about this. Do you have some specific examples of sort of the X2 difference, either enhancements inside the properties or elevated experiences that these people get to be a part of each and every day? What does it feel like to work in an X2 enabled building?
Yeah. Last time we spoke, we were actively rolling it out on a single asset.
Yeah.
We're proud to announce that we've actively now rolled it out on 5 assets, and so we have a lot more measurables and data behind us than we did 7.5 months ago. But, to really simplify it down to a handful of things that we think we do differently than the traditional office service providers really starts with who we hire and how we hire. I think that we have historically looked within our own industry for new individuals to bring on to the team. And as with any traditional hiring process, when you stick to the traditional methods, you get traditional results. And so as we talked about getting differentiation, we looked at hiring outside of the commercial real estate world into the F&B business, into the catering community events business, and into the hospitality business. We also enlisted a high-end hotel training program to build a proprietary training for our people, and that was rolled out about 1.5 years ago. And so we're really, really proud of that, and that really changed the mindset of our people before they even stepped foot onto the job, of the expectations that we had and the resources that we were allocating to them to really elevate the entire experience from start to finish. And then lastly, we shifted around really the roles and responsibilities of a traditional property management team. And so, the way that we looked at it from the very beginning was, if we were going to truly elevate it to a whole new level, we had to kind of break the whole thing down and start from scratch. And so, we looked at how we're operating buildings, how we're interacting with tenants, how we're running accounting, how we're running the financial reporting, and really tried to bifurcate and specialize each of those tasks so that there was someone solely dedicated on customer experience, and then giving that individual the empowerment and responsibility to solely focus on customer experience and customer relations, which, believe it or not, was not the way that it's traditionally done. It's kind of an afterthought traditionally of tenant relations, they used to call it, of if you have some extra time, go do some customer interaction. And as I'm sure you guessed, Jay, that didn't work out too well from a customer experience standpoint.
Yeah, you actually call that role now the customer experience manager, right? That's the actual sort of job title.
Correct.
And as somebody who has been writing about and talking about and advising on customer experience for 30 years, I was like, well, of course you should have a customer experience manager. Like, it was like, so like, well, yeah. But then to hear you say, no, nobody's ever done that before. It's always just sort of tenant relations, and it's an afterthought. And I was like, oh, wow, this X2 thing really is quite a bit different. And I love what you said about sort of the hospitality focus, right? Like, treating your responsibility to your tenants and your tenants' guests and even your own team more the way a high-end hotel treats their guests, or a high-end restaurant, et cetera. And that changes the relationship dynamics considerably, right? And it probably takes time for people to be like, oh, wow, this is different than the previous building, or they do interact with us differently now. What kind of feedback do you get from people who actually are in the 5 properties where X2 exists? I mean, do they parrot that back to you? Do you hear those stories like, wow, I can't believe how different it is? And like, what's kind of the feedback loop for you?
Yeah, fortunately, we've implemented some pretty high-end customer experience management surveying systems through
Nice.
a partner. And so we have hundreds of survey responses that we diligently go through and try to pivot and make changes and address issues and opportunities that we have within the building. I think the best way to answer that question, Jay, is really to give you just a real-time example. So,
please, yeah.
At one of the buildings we have in downtown Washington, D.C., we were going through a renovation to the old fitness center, maybe one of the ones that Preston had mentioned from decades ago, to really bring it up to today's standards and expand it and make it look a lot nicer and function a lot nicer. And through our customer experience manager at the building, we understood that the anchor tenant, which in our business is the largest tenant in the building, one of the partners at that firm was a triathlete, and he was using that fitness center on a daily basis while he was at the office to train for his triathlon. And we found out that he wanted and needed that, and it was very important to him. And since he was a partner at the firm, it would also be very important to his firm, since that was where they decided to office and pay us rent. And so we worked out an agreement where we could utilize a fitness center around the corner from that building for the triathlete to utilize while we were under construction. And then we also took it a step further in understanding what specific equipment he would need and want in that fitness center for his triathlon training. And I use that example as we have dozens more like that, where it's like the traditional way that we delivered property management, 99% sure we probably never would have understood or heard anything about that until maybe that tenant was up to renew its lease and said, you know what, I got really frustrated when the fitness center was under construction. No one talked to me. No one helped me try to figure out a solution. And there's a building down the street that has a better customer experience than this building. So I think that's a good example of, elevating the experience and really trying to curate and customize each of our interactions.
That's amazing. How's the triathlon going? We have an update? We got to know.
Yeah, we got to call the team on the ground and check in on that.
Yeah, we got to check that out.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned the feedback mechanism in the surveys. Have you always done that, or is that sort of part of the X2 differentiator, is more opportunities for feedback amongst tenants and other important folks?
Yeah, so probably not surprisingly, we have had surveying tools historically, but much like I think the prioritization of tenant relations versus other tasks, that surveying tool was very limited and only delivered typically one time per year. And as someone as
kind of as a
experienced
necessary evil.
Yeah.
And especially as someone as experienced as you in the customer experience world, you would be embarrassed to see this thing as we were when we looked at what we were utilizing. And so we engage Qualtrics, which is a pretty well-known customer experience management tool, to create a 25-question survey that we deliver on a quarterly basis that gets as detailed as how is the fitness center functioning? Are there any additional equipment or services that you would like to see there? All the way through to how's our security team doing? How's our janitorial team doing? How's our property management team? And then with that data, we also added, which I know you'll be proud to hear, but we added a Net Promoter Score, which also, believe it or not, Jay, is a term that no one in our industry knows. And so we began tracking, I think, one of the first buildings in all of commercial real estate, Net Promoter Score at these assets. And we're really proud to report that we're above 80, which I know you know what that means. A lot of people,
strong.
Maybe listeners don't know, but 80 is kind of the high water mark that you try to get to on an NPS score. And we're very proud to be continuing to achieve an 80-plus NPS score. And we'll continue to send surveys, maybe to the dismay of some people taking them, but we do get people to take them. And I think most importantly, as you probably can attest to, we try to take action with them, right? It's not a check the box and set it and forget it. It's what's the actual comments that are coming through when we see a positive score, and we can expand on those services because of that positive score, or a negative score, and we can immediately address it, like the triathlete example, and try to solve the solution.
Yeah, people don't hate surveys. People hate surveys that don't do any good. Right? They hate surveys that don't get read, because then it's like, I'm giving you my time, and for what exactly? And so one of the key pieces to that is to make sure that people know that you are reading the surveys, and that it's actually having an effect. So hopefully, folks in the building watch this conversation and like, oh yeah, that's why we got the triathlete. Like they understand that it actually does work. And then everybody's like, okay, yeah, I'll keep making my recommendations to you. Preston, do you think tenants have a different expectation post-pandemic about kind of what their office space can or should do for them, or again, is this just sort of a natural evolution?
I think that they do. The short answer, and I think that a lot of it, has to do just with what population types are really expanding into the workplace environment right now, and which ones are going the other direction. And I think it's very clear that the millennial workforce places a major emphasis on work-life balance, and I think that's great. And I think that my generation, Gen X, and the generations prior are probably guilty, of not having done as much of that. And so I think there is that momentum that's kind of behind that in all of these conversations, and so we're certainly kind of seeing that trend. I think also what we're also seeing is just less workforce participation. And so as a result, you just have much more leverage on the employee side versus the employer, and to where not only is there a demand for greater experience, but it's backed with some teeth, in that if they don't like it, they'll just leave because they've got several other job offers. Even right now in fourth quarter of 2023, in spite of what some might be calling a mild recession here over the last year. And so I think a lot of that is really putting the task to employers to say, okay, look, all right, we really have to listen. Otherwise, we start getting into other metrics we don't like turnover ratio and whatnot, and that'll absolutely kill a company. So what can we do in order to create kind of this optimal work environment where most employers, if not all of them, still fully believe that you have to be in the office in order to really be at your peak productivity? So in light of that, what can we be doing to get our employees back in order to make sure that we're hitting kind of peak efficiency, peak profitability from a company standpoint, but at the same time keeping our constituents happy? And so, of course, X2's just dovetailed really nicely into that.
I think the other thing I'd add, Jay, and we talked quickly about this last time because I know you were referencing your friend that owns a coffee shop around the corner, but the alternatives to workspace have drastically changed over the last 3 years, where prior to COVID, I think your option of workspace was going to your office where, majority of people went, or probably some pretty dysfunctional or unfunctional home office that
Yep.
had an uncomfy chair, maybe had some spotty Wi-Fi. Obviously, in March of 20, we were all forced to create a functioning home workspace. And then I think the alternative spaces, from the coffee shops like your friend around the corner to gyms started opening co-working spaces. Traditional co-working companies had, like WeWork and Regus and Industrious, started expanding. And so the competition we saw from a traditional office use expanded greatly. And so we had to start to compete with competitors that we traditionally, if ever, have not had to compete with. And, I think as part of that, we also looked at what are some of the things that those spaces offer that a traditional office building doesn't, and tried to overlay that with expanded scope of services, expanded amenities, and then obviously always rooted and centered around customer experience.
I think it was about, 250 days ago or something like that when we talked last. This year has been weird, right? There's been a lot of changes in commercial in 2023. So what are those changes been, the ones that sort of matter the most to you? And have the changes, even since the last time we spoke, have they altered how you have rolled out X2? I mean, have you made kind of course corrections or improvements along the way, just sort of based on what a wild year it's been?
Yeah. The short answer is yes. And I was actually, I know I'm from Chicago, but as you can tell by the picture behind me, I'm actually in Dallas right now. And I just had lunch with one of our co-founders, and we were talking about the roller coaster of 2023. And, for listeners that aren't familiar with commercial real estate, the interest rate hikes that have happened over 2023 have been pretty impactful to our industry: office, industrial, data center, multifamily, and others. And so, as it relates to how it's impacted our industry, Jay, I think it's really caused some pause on just big decisions as it relates to selling a building, buying a building, maybe a big tenant moving into a building or relocating from an existing building, which fortunately for the operations side, like office property management and X2 specifically, I think has created opportunities for us to find ways to create value without some major transaction, whether someone's selling the building or buying the building, and even investing significant capital into buildings. And so, we had one of our property management leaders, I think, said it best, is that why can't our people be the amenities of this building? Why does the fitness center and why does the conference center and the lounge and maybe the rooftop bar need to be amenities? Our people are the amenities of this building and can be and should be. And so we've recognized it. Fortunately, a lot of our clients have recognized that there's an opportunity for a pretty limited capital spend to significantly change the way that your office building operates and customers experience it. And ultimately, through 250 days of data, as you referenced, we've actually seen measurable data points to show that. We've increased physical occupancy at these buildings.
Wow.
We've increased the number of prospect tours that we've had. We've renewed tenants at almost 100%, and we expect and hopefully we'll continue to see pretty significant impacted measurables as it relates to the success of elevating the customer experience.
Oh, it's amazing to see that kind of, not just the net promoter score we talked about earlier, but that kind of line level ROI in terms of renewals and inbound inquiries and things like that. That's really extraordinary. Preston, when you hear that kind of data, does it make you want to apply X2 to all the properties in the portfolio, and is that even realistic?
Well, that data has been what has been missing ever since I've been in the business. Just to talk about that specifically real quick. A lot of us that are on the front lines, talking with tenants every day, we know in our gut that if you provided a higher level of service, you would get rewarded for it. But it has been so difficult to really articulate what that means.
Yeah, no attribution modeling.
Yeah, there is no attribution model. And so what we have really sought out to do over the last couple of years, thanks to Adam's efforts, is really try to find a way to quantify the qualitative. And so that survey and the various ones and questions that we put together, it really cuts two ways in a good way. most importantly, it helps us better understand where we can be doing better in order to provide an optimal experience, to our customers. But secondly, it helps us and better quantify what we are doing to show future clients just the real value that providing quality customer service can do to their building. The industry standard has probably been around 70% on tenant renewal. If we can take that retention percentage up, well above that, that's going to be a massive windfall opportunity for our clients. If we can increase rents, if we can reduce the amount of time that space is sitting idly, not being leased, all of that will contribute to the dollar and cents of making it a more profitable investment. And so all the stuff that we've always inherently known about that customer service will provide a better ROI through the surveying that we've been able to do, and I think that surveying only gets stronger the more assets that we start to put in within X2 to be able to really not just articulate but then predict just what that return will be on future assets. So it's been huge.